Jesus said in Matthew 5:19, "Do and teach God's law." This is God's law number 15. Discipline and teach children. Hello, everybody. I'm Jim McCotter. Welcome. Here is law number 15 from God's law book of Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 6 and 7. You must commit yourself wholeheartedly to these commands that I'm giving you today. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. End quote. God has not given the state responsibility or authority over children. God has only given parents responsibility and authority over their own children. God's law, as well as the New Testament, makes that very clear. The Apostle Paul said in Ephesians 6:4, quote, "Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but you bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord." End quote. There are many verses showing mothers are to teach their children as well, but it should be noted, fathers have the primary responsibility and authority to teach their children. Though mothers may do the majority of the formal teaching time, fathers who leave it all up to mothers are shirking their responsibility to their wife and their children. First, discipline. It should also be noted in Ephesians 6:4, there are two primary areas of a father being responsible to carry out with his children: discipline and instruction. It may also be interesting to note that it puts discipline first. Most modern parents, being brainwashed from today's humanist education, don't realize that the rod and reproof are both necessary for a child to have wisdom. An education without wisdom will be more destructive to a person than beneficial. Children who are disciplined well will become self-disciplined, and with it gain wisdom. Proverbs 29:15 says, quote, "The rod and reproof give wisdom, but a child left to himself brings shame to his mother." End quote. The shame to a mother may not be just the ill behavior of her child, but may be the neglect of a mother who obviously did not apply the rod and reproof with her son. There is such a thing as child abuse, which is abominable. But leaving a child to himself and not disciplining a child is also child abuse. Proverbs 13:24 says, "Those who spare the rod of discipline hate their children. Those who love their children care enough to discipline them." Second, teaching. The Apostle Paul said, "Discipline and then instruct." Getting general education is good, but Paul specifically said instruction of the Lord, end quote. Without instruction of the Lord is getting education without wisdom, which produces character. Without wisdom and character, education will become counterproductive, if not destructive. The word instruction here in Greek carries with it the thought of admonition and exhortation with the instruction. The word for child training in the 15th law in Deuteronomy 6:7 was to teach your children. The Hebrew word meaning for teach is to sharpen, to teach incisively, to pierce, end quote. The preface to this law of parents teaching their children is, "You must commit yourselves wholeheartedly to these commands." There may be liberty for others to also teach our children, but the emphasis, exclusive authority, and responsibility, and only mandate from God is for parents to teach their children and to, quote, "teach them diligently," end quote. Proverbs 1:8 says, "Listen, my son, to your father's instruction, and do not forsake your mother's teaching." Proverbs 6:20, "My son, obey your father's commands, and don't neglect your mother's instruction." Proverbs 6:23, "For this command is a lamp, and the teaching is a light, and reproof and instruction are the way to life." End quote. As seen in the above verses, generally speaking, the Father gives the commands, and the mother does the teaching. Commands are briefer, the general overarching rule and direction. The command is a lamp which holds and contains the light. Teaching is more elaborate, provides the fuller details and understanding. The teaching is the light, the reproof, and the instruction. Proverbs 7:2 says, "Obey my commands and live. Guard my teachings as you guard your own eyes." End quote. Proverbs, the book of wisdom, ends indicating that when a mother opens her mouth, wisdom is always coming out. And what is wisdom? Good character. This is the most important thing in the world to teach a son or daughter. And kindness is one of the top character traits to teach every child. So Proverbs 31:26 says, "She opens her mouth with wisdom, and the teaching of kindness is on her tongue." End quote. All the above teaching may be in a more formal setting. There are the commands, all the teaching regarding these commands, but then there must be training in all of this. Third, training. Each one of the above general areas will tend to require more time given to it. First, discipline, if done correctly, should require the least amount of time. Second, teaching will require considerably more time and effort. Third, training should require even more time than teaching. Training relates to practice, rehearsing again and again whatever you want them to do or be like or how to speak, etc. Children can and must be trained to have godly character. We associate training with academics for things such as learning to spell or learning multiplication tables, but it is no less important to train for godliness. We think of training with sports, going over the same thing time and time again until we have it down perfectly. For example, any top basketball player will have trained in shooting free throws literally thousands of times. Jesus said in Luke 16:10, quote, "He that is faithful in that which is least is faithful also in much." Young children, by the time they are 2, can easily be trained to be faithful in a lot of little things, not to touch a plug, or certain dangerous things to not touch. And instead of making a house, quote, child-proof, as some do, how about training the child not to touch things that are breakable or anything you say the word no to? This is not hard to do if the parent is faithful and consistent with appropriate discipline and teaching and then training. It takes very little discipline if it's done correctly, and there is adequate attention to training at the very early age. For example, don't always pull things away from a little child, but use the reaching moments as training opportunity moments. Moreover, even before a child can talk, if they associate a hard flick on their finger with the single word no, you'll soon only need to quietly say no, and they'll quickly obey and pull their hand away from grabbing something. Proverbs 29:17 says, "Discipline your children, and they will give you peace. They will bring you the delights you desire." End quote. A child can learn real fast how to be mannerly, to speak, to act, whatever is good or right. Parents being consistent is all that matters. If children aren't taught to obey when young, it gets much, much harder every year. Moreover, a disciplined child is always much happier, and a disciplined person is not less creative, but more creative and fulfilled. Proverbs 22:6 says, "Train up a child in the way he should go, and even when he is old, he will not depart from it." 1 Timothy 4:7 says, "Train yourself to be godly." Fourth, talking. The fourth and final command for parents, quote, "These commands you shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise up." End quote. This is the icing on the cake. What do you talk about with your children throughout the day? what you mostly talk about with your children will be what they mostly give their life to. Fifth, example. This is not a command, but a fact. The most powerful influence on our children is our own example. And more than all the above four areas put together, Jesus said in Luke 6:40, everyone, when he has been fully trained, will be like his teacher. Jesus is saying when a child is growing up, he will be more like his teacher, his parents, than what he is taught. Realize this is good news for good parents.